Hello, and welcome to the annual WriteHive conference. This year is jam-packed with a ton of great sessions for writers, writing professionals, and the publishing industry. WriteHive is a nonprofit serving the writing community with resources, events, programming, connections, and more. The 2022 conference brings you this panel, Writing Tools, Tropes versus Cliches, where we'll discuss how to identify tropes and cliches and also how to use them in your writing. If you like content similar to this, you can listen to the November 2021 episode of our Word Nerd Cafe podcast titled No-Nos and Cliches. My name is Julie. I'm a graphic artist and fantasy writer, and I have with me 5 awesome panelists today. We're very excited to get this conversation going. I'll go ahead and let the panelists introduce themselves.
Hello, so I'm Lucy A. McLaren. I'm a fantasy author as well. My first book released on the 1st of May this year. And it's the first in a trilogy. And in terms of tropes and cliches, I feel like the fantasy genre is one that is rife with these. So I'm looking forward to discussing them with everyone.
And Tiffany?
Yes, my name is Tiffany Christina Lewis, and I do use my middle name because my mom decided to give me a very common name. I am an author, typically crime fiction, but I love to write multiple genres. I'm also a podcaster, and my podcast revolves around, because I'm also a beta reader, so my podcast just revolves around information for authors on how to use beta readers, how to find beta readers, and some different tips that I often give authors when I read for them.
Lynn?
Hi, I'm Linda Codega, but I go by Lynn or L, it really doesn't matter. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a fantasy writer. My book is on sub right now. Who knows where it's going to be or when it's going to be. But in my day-to-day life, I'm a pop culture reporter for Ao3. So I write a lot about tabletop role-playing games, fantasy and science fiction, film, books, and other various media. So I see a lot.
My name is Katie Edwards. I am a urban fantasy author of a series called The Tarot Sequence, which reimagines a modern day Atlantis. It's planned to be a 9-novel series. The 3rd book just came out in May, and it's a series that features heavy elements of queer identity and found family, and hopefully a lot of action and adventure as well. And very excited for this topic. I think this is definitely one of the meatier subjects you can get to when you're talking about writing.
And Erin.
Hi, my name's Erin Fulmer. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an author of science fiction and fantasy, and my Cambion urban fantasy series is published with City Owl Press. With the 2nd book is coming out this year. It draws from my experience as an attorney and bisexual woman. I think genre fiction involves a lot of work with tropes, and I tend to think a lot about them while writing. So there are certain ones that I like to play to and other ones that I want to flip or subvert. So I'm very excited to get into the meat of this discussion.
Excellent. All right, thanks everybody. So let's get on with some questions. We'll just start very broad, and we'll go ahead and talk about how you would define a trope and what would some examples be.
Sure. Actually, I'm a pretty big fan of tropes myself. They're, in a lot of cases, they boil down to metaphors and similes. One website I was on said it describes a convention that most people can easily recognize and understand because they've seen it so often. For me, tropes have always been a narrative shortcut, a single image or idea or phrase that to some extent, to a certain degree, gets us all on the same page. It helps us skip over some unnecessary exposition and lets you go right into a scene. When I think of examples of tropes, when you're talking about hard sci-fi, faster than light travel, or universal translators, if you've got a universe filled with a lot of different planets and species, having something like this is almost essential. I think in a big general sense, us versus them is one of the biggest tropes of all, whether it be alien arrivals, teachers, authority figures, politicians. You can easily slip into an us versus them trope, whether it's to the benefit or detriment of a story. I think other tropes could be the chosen one is a big one. That's been around as long as I remember reading science fiction and fantasy. Ripped from the headlines, Law and Order, taking very popular news stories and making them into episodes. An example of a trope that I've used: 2 people, 1 bed. I didn't even necessarily know what a trope was when my readers are fantastic they're so good about identifying my own writing when I'm using them. One of the first tropes I really used was, other than possibly the chosen one, was two people, one bed, stuck in a winter snowstorm in this, of course, conveniently, desolate house that just happens to be in the middle of the forest, but there's of course only one room that they can share together. I think tropes are important in the sense that they could lead to genres: post-apocalyptic, end of days, weather emergencies, moaning zombies that want to eat our brains. They do create genres, and there's a reason for that, because people want to read it, and those subgenres can be incredibly profitable and lucrative and interesting niches of writing, especially in sci-fi. I think though, and I'm sure a lot of us are going to talk about this, the best thing about tropes is that if people really expect them, you can subvert them. You can do something creative and new with it that have people really take notice of an author in your story as well. But I am a big fan of tropes. I can't wait to hear the rest of the responses too and talk about cliches.
Yeah, I'm also a really big fan of tropes. I think they get a bad rap. I think that people think the idea of creativity and originality in writing is just kind of a double-edged sword. Everyone wants to be original, but they think in order to be original, you can't use tropes at all. But as you said, KD, subverting tropes is actually what makes you original. The idea is that you can take that, really the backbone of that genre, or, depending if you're writing really closely genre fiction, then some of these tropes readers expect. And so, like you were saying, if you can think of a creative way to subvert those, that is how you make an original story, or you make something that would be considered more creative than someone who just uses a trope in the normal way. We've seen it a million times. That's not as interesting. So tropes are really a tool for authors to use and to analyze and to understand, so that way they can use them for their work creatively and originally.
Yeah, I totally agree. I found an interesting quote, and I wonder what everyone thinks of this, saying that basically a cliche is something to avoid because they've basically been overused to the point that the story it produces no longer surprises anyone. So I forget where I got that from. Google it, because that will tell you exactly where it came from. But I think that's the opposite of what you're saying, isn't it? Avoid a cliche, because if you're putting a cliche in your story, it's not going to surprise anyone, because the very definition of it being a cliche means you know exactly where it's going. But yeah, I wonder what everyone else thought of that, in terms of, do you think that there's still a place for them alongside tropes? Because I totally agree. I think tropes are really good tools for writers, and could cliches be as well, or are they just inherently negative and to be avoided?
Big question. So yeah, like in order to talk about that, how would we define a cliche versus a trope?
Yeah, so I think I describe a cliche as the first thing that you reach for when you're trying to explain something, or you're trying to describe someone, or you're trying to express an emotion. I think that cliches are not necessarily as encompassing as a trope. Like a trope can be a plot line or a character or a conflict, whereas a cliche, I personally would describe as something much smaller that people can have seen so many times that it eventually means nothing at this point. And that's how I would describe a cliche. And I think that sometimes cliches can be used in very funny ways and like very satirical, like humorous, cutting ways. But I feel in general, using a trope is much easier to do than using a cliche. And I feel like using a cliche is often, I feel like using a trope is something that people do intentionally in order to, like what Katie said, like bring a reader in, to help a reader like understand the kind of basic parlance of what you're trying to say without having to over explain it. But a cliche is always trying to explain something in the easiest possible way without actually giving it any real context.
And I think that both cliches and tropes are a way to think about reader expectations, especially as genre writers and readers. We come into our favorite genres with certain expectations for what is going to happen. And essentially, I kind of think that a cliche is a trope that has, like Katie said, I think has become so predictable that it no longer holds any surprise for the reader or any freshness. Whereas a trope is one that will bring joy and interest and familiarity to a reader. And I think it can be a fine line. But I think that the cliches definitely, when you're using a cliche, it definitely means, like you said, Lynn, that you're not bringing your own viewpoint and your own perspective and your own creativity to that idea. And I think that the way to keep it fresh is to bring that part of yourself into it.
I think also cliches can be dangerous. One of the things that, and I'm speaking from the I here because I've evolved as a writer. Even from my first book, I listened really carefully to what my readers said. And I realized that I did not treat, it was a book about largely the queer experience, and my queer experience is from a gay man. So right there, I went off the rails because I didn't realize that the queer spectrum is so much broader than just me, but also just because I'm writing with a lot of gay men doesn't mean I can marginalize my woman in my story, the female cast. And particularly over the last 2 years, I've paid so close attention to my readers, and I have learned so much. And one of the things I find most dangerous about cliches is the way they treat women. Especially look at the history of writing and look at where we were 10 years ago. Look at the sci-fi authors that you used as to inspire you and create a writer. And in some cases, a lot of those writers did not age well. You can't look back on some of them, these best-selling series, sci-fi series from the 70s and 80s, especially, and not realize that they're using things like sexual assault as cliches, as humor in some cases, tricking the girl into a date. You know, you think of that for juvenile, like, comedies, or the damsel in distress. Think of those cliches that they are dated. And this is a risk to you as a writer, that if you rely on some of these cliches, you could be dating yourself 10 years from now or more. You could be doing some things that the rest of the world is going to realize, we've got to stop relying on some of this terminology or phrasing. I think cliches are worth. Tropes are, again, they're fun. You're right. You can celebrate them. You can subvert them. Cliches, you want to be really careful. The only time I use cliches, or try to, is when I'm pointing out a bad guy. That's I want the bad guy in some cases to be a little bit cliched because I'm using it in an ironic sense.
Yeah, I see what you mean, KD. I think when you're talking there, to me, it almost kind of, there's a line between where cliche blurs into stereotype.
Absolutely.
And yeah, that's totally dangerous for writers to do. And it's amazing that you've taken on board like reader feedback. And I feel like that's something that we should all do as writers, is if we do something unintentionally, then that's pointed out to us when someone reads it, be open to like going back and thinking, okay, yeah, maybe I could have researched that a bit more, or whatever it is, spoken to people in that community. And I think that's probably a good way of, like you said, of avoiding cliches, is to try and do as much research as possible. If we're doing something consciously, we have that responsibility to make sure that we're not doing it in a harmful way.
Yeah, I tend to see cliches as a much smaller part of any narrative than a trope. Like I think a trope and a stereotype, for me personally, and like classification is dumb, semantics this, semantics that, like who cares? But for me, like a cliche is generally a much smaller portion of writing, right? I see cliches happening like in the moment, like in the line writing, rather than necessarily something that is a longer plot line or a character or a situation. I think those might be like tropes or stereotypes or whatever. So that's how I tend to view cliches. I don't know how you guys structure your own personal semantic definitions of words. Who knows? But yeah, I definitely see cliches as like the way of the method of like least possible resistance when you're trying to express something.
I think we might have already covered this, but this question was for Tiffany. What common ways are tropes and cliches confused? If you have any other thoughts on that.
Yes, I do. And actually, I'm going to take from Lynn on this, because I think the word, yes, that I think of, like what you're saying basically is related to the theme of your story or the theme of that trope. Like my favorite example of a trope that I don't necessarily write, but I see it a lot because I'm a huge horror fan, is the final girl trope. And so there's a ton of different ways that this is used. Either they use it straight, and this girl is virginal, she's smart, she can kick butt, and she just survives until the end. Other stories are not like that, where the final girl is maybe even the opposite of what we originally saw as the final girl when horror movies and books were first introducing this idea. So that trope is the theme of the whole movie, the whole story, not like the one little piece that maybe a cliche is. Something, you know, like time heals all wounds. This is like just a phrase, a cliched phrase that talks about a theme of patience, but that's it. It just is one little section of what this whole story is supposed to mean. So then it's also a phrase like this, which is not demonstrative to any group, is just a piece of what we should be doing. And so people just often kind of think they're the same thing. And I think Lynn's idea of it, like the fact that like a trope is a bigger part of our writing, a bigger part of what motivates our plots, is really accurate in comparison to like a cliche, which just is like a tiny thing that doesn't move your story forward. It doesn't engage the reader. It doesn't really do anything. And sometimes, like Katie said, it actually harms people.
Very well said.
Thank you.
So I guess this would be a question for Erin. What effect does the inclusion of tropes and cliches have on a story? Which we've also touched on.
Yeah, I touched on this a little bit already, but I really think that tropes kind of invoke these reader expectations, and they allow us also to play with reader expectations in the sense that a trope can be flipped, or we can bring in a fresh take on it, or, you know, bring something to it that's different than what readers have seen, or play it the way that they expect to bring that sense of familiarity. And I think that all genre writing kind of involves an interplay between familiarity and fulfilling those expectations that the readers come to the genre with, versus surprising them and bringing something new. And I think that that's the real kind of tightrope of genre writing, is you want to be able to do both. You want to be able to give the reader what they want in the sense that they're there for a certain kind of story, but also bring that surprise and that freshness. And oftentimes for me, it often comes with bringing something that I don't always see and that I want to see into the tropes that I love. My series involves a bisexual heroine, and some of those tropes that we're used to seeing in heterosexual relationships, I like to play with those and bring a little bit of same-sex tension and show attraction going both ways. So that's one way that I like to play with tropes. And I also think that there are certain tropes that can outright be a selling point, that people seek out certain tropes because they love them so much, and because you know that you're going to get the kind of story that brings you joy. You know, the happy ever after, only one bed, you know, especially when I think about romance, I think about those kind of tropes. And I don't think it's a bad thing for genres to be trope driven, because it does come to that sense of joy that readers have in having their expectations fulfilled. But I also think that it's important to know what tropes you're working with, so you can bring that freshness and flip them and play with them. I mean, I think tropes are really, they involve a conversation that you're having both with your readers and with your genre and what's come before. And I think that that's one of the really fun ways to use tropes, is as part of that, as your contribution to the conversation that the wider genre kind of includes.
I mean, it reminds me of just like Ao3 tags, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know for a fact that Tor has like a massive spreadsheet with all of their books, and just like they just have all of the Ao3 tags there, so like the readers can like the reviewers can like figure out which ones they want to review based on like the tropes that make them happy. And it's very clear that like this is obviously not new, you know, this is something that like people have been trying to figure out different variations on how to like how to consume stories on different variations of the thing that they love forever. But it's really great that we have come to a point where tags are so accessible and tropes are so accessible, and everyone has this sort of like common parlance of discussing what tropes we love. And I think that's really wonderful. I love that.
Same. I tell people all the time that well, all my author friends, I remind them, like, people are coming to your book specifically for this trope, so don't shy away from it. You know, if you're doing fantasy or war, you know, one of my friends writes war-based fantasy, and so I'm just like, yeah, they're looking for swords, they're looking for, don't hold back on that kind of stuff. That's literally what people are coming for. So yeah, and I'm really glad that we're starting to see it as because readers have subconsciously always done that.
Just really quick for sorry, anybody who's not aware of what Ao3 tags are, could somebody explain those for me?
Oh no, I brought it up. This is on me. This is my burden to carry. Ao3 tags are basically descriptors that authors use to communicate what their book or what their fan fiction is going to be about on the fan fiction archive site, Archive of Our Own, Ao3. And some tags are very, you know, innocuous, like only one bed, and some tags are unrepeatable. Just cannot say what they are. But it's also a way that people like have used to spin tropes on their head, just like in a short amount of words, and figuring out like only one bed, but it was planned all along. It's like they're in the closet, but really in the closet, and it's, you know, Steed and Ed making out the auxiliary closet. I'm just like, delicious. Perfect.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and Katie, I'm sorry I interrupted you earlier.
No, I was only going to say that some, you know, reinventing tropes is one of the best and kind of the most fun things as a writer. I mean, that's where you can really apply your sense of creativity, because some tropes are absolutely essential. I mean, especially when you're writing sci-fi. I mean, when I, like, for instance, the faster than light travel, FTL travel, using universal translators so people can understand each other. Like, it's really hard to do sci-fi without some of that. But the interesting thing is, sometimes people don't even realize that that trope is there because authors work so hard to reinvent it. You know, you have faster than light travel. How do you use faster than light travel without calling it faster than light travel? What other things could you do? You know, wormholes, just what, Mass Effect, you know, like whatever they come up with something which almost becomes like a brand for their story, or, you know, their own claimed trope. So it's an opportunity for creativity too, I think.
I mean, I think a lot of it's probably been covered already. I just basically had a line saying, don't be lazy, in my notes. Like, yeah, it's like we said, the tropes are there, and they are amazing tools. And like you said, KD, sometimes I think they're essential to certain stories, and especially in SFF, I would say. Yeah, and I think it's gives you as a writer almost like a foundation to work from, but to, yeah, totally let your creativity flow with it, change it up. Like, for example, I got, like, if you're going to have like the mentor character in your book, don't make him like a wizened old man, like, you know, change it. Like, we've seen that so many times at this point. Like, it doesn't have to be Gandalf, essentially. And yeah, I think it's just about making it something unexpected and surprising, like we've said, but also striking that balance of, yeah, certain readers are coming to this story for example, The Chosen One is obviously a very popular one. People are going to expect to see certain things in your story, but also, yeah, like I say, don't be lazy and don't just kind of ride off the coattails of that trope and let that tell your story, essentially. Mix it up. Like in my book Awakening that's coming out, I do have a chosen one character, but she's not the main character. She's a 6-year-old girl, and like, who has very little kind of control over what she's doing with the powers that she has. So I kind of she's essential to the story, but also she doesn't have that agency that a lot of chosen one characters kind of start developing as they go on through the story. So yeah, I'll stop waffling now. Basically, don't be lazy.
I think that should be the subtitle of this this panel: tropes versus cliches. Don't be lazy, because I think that's really what it's about. Even with the tropes, because cliches, I think we could classify like on the bottom of like whether you're being lazy or not. But with tropes, you can still be lazy and kind of just throw them in there, which is not what we want. We want it to be interesting. We want it to be evolved. And so, yeah, it's still, you need to know exactly what it is. You need to learn about it. You need to read books that include those tropes and then work on it, which I think our craft is all about. Every single time we write is to be better. So using tropes does require a little bit of work.
How about cliches? So we mentioned cliches are, maybe like a smaller snapshot or work on the line level. And Katie, are there ways to use those as tools? I think we've already hit on that a little bit too.
Right. Yeah, I mean, to use cliches as tools, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you're using it ironically, especially, sometimes you need it to create a shortcut, and that's fine. Sometimes it's a placeholder in your first draft before you go back and identify it as a cliche and try to put something more creative in. There is a time and a place for it. It's why it exists. And sometimes keep in mind, let's be honest, you don't know if you're writing a cliche because it's not cliche yet. I'm sure we're going to be asking questions which get to that, but be aware that you're not just writing for the moment, you're hopefully writing for years down the road as well. So, but yes, we have kind of touched on it, but I personally like using cliches when it comes to clueless jerks, bad guys, anyone I want a convenient handle to really go after narratively, or give the other characters a nice one-liner because they're acting like such a cliche. But that's more of an indulgence.
So it is definitely possible to use tropes and cliches. They're not something to be avoided at all. But is it ever possible to write a story without using any tropes or cliches?
Yeah, I love this question because to me, it's kind of a trick question. I think it'd be very, very difficult to write without using any tropes or cliches in the sense that you would essentially have to avoid all reader expectations. But even if you did try to do that as an interesting exercise, the point that I made earlier about tropes being part of a larger conversation within a genre, you're still having a conversation with those tropes and cliches by not including them, if that makes sense. I think right. Something that just occurred to me as I was listening to everyone talk is that even when you're avoiding a trope, it's still a part of that larger dialogue. You're still avoiding it because you know what the expectations are, which go back to, as writers, and something I wanted to mention, it's so important to reading your genre, so you know what those tropes and expectations are. And I also wanted to touch on something that came up for me while I was thinking about this, is that I think that there's certain tropes or cliches that people are happy to say are dead, and in fact, some folks may have a perspective on that they haven't had a chance to bring. And I've seen this a lot in SFF, where marginalized authors get, labeled with using cliches or using tropes or using something that's already been done before, when in fact they're bringing a whole different perspective to that. And so I think that when we're thinking about tropes and cliches, it's important to remember that I don't think any idea like this is truly dead, because we all bring our fresh perspective to it, especially when it's authors who haven't had a chance to bring their perspective to the conversation. So I think I kind of made a tangent there, but it was a point that came up for me earlier and I really wanted to make. So I'm just using my time to make it right now. But yeah, I think it would be very, very difficult. I don't know. I think that tropes are also something that we bring love to as genre writers. And I write what I love, and sometimes that involves tropes. And I think that writing without any of the tropes you love might be kind of a joyless a joyless endeavor. So I don't even know if that is something that I would ever seek out.
So speaking of like the topic of like you write tropes because you love them, I did an interview with Alex Rowland that will likely be out soon, or may even be out by the time this goes live. But basically they were talking about their book, A Taste of Golden Iron, which is just like all of the tropes in one beautiful, magnificent, bonkers romance book. But they specifically said that they took all those tropes that they loved to create this book. And it's basically a book that's entirely tropes. It's just perfect. And I'm just like, good soup. Good soup. Yeah, so I think that like, if you can make something joyful and exciting and expressive and wonderful, like just using tropes, like do it, please. I love it. Everyone loves tropes. So I think that there's such a great point you made, Erin. It's just like, you gotta love it. And if you love it, it'll be joyful and fun and exciting. But like, you gotta really, really love what you're trying to do. And sometimes that means, you know, every single trope you could possibly think of, like bodyguard and like the liege lord. And I'm just like, are they gonna kiss?
I love that comment, by the way. I thought it was fantastic. When I think of trying to write without tropes, it can be like, I would give an answer to a young writer, someone who's relatively new at it, someone who is stubborn about, you know, setting out and not writing a book with tropes. That is a very dangerous road to go down, because once you eliminate tropes, you're eliminating the shortcuts that really get reader immediately involved in the story. If you're constantly, like for instance, you're not going to use faster than light travel. You're not going to use universal translators. If this story takes place in the future, you're going to invent slang that doesn't exist yet, so that it's almost impossible to decipher what the readers are, or what the characters are saying. It can really damage your accessibility. It can hurt getting new readers in. It can be so dense and intractable that as a reader, I'm not seeing the joy in reading it, let alone identifying, like you said, your joy in creating it. So it can be really difficult for a new writer who thinks that subverting trope means not including any tropes at all. You know, there's a reason they exist for a reason. And while there are good, you know, rules to follow along the way, I don't discount the importance of them. I look at an example for two examples I can give. The graphic novel series Invisibles that was out a long time ago. I think it was a Vertigo series. Vertigo is one of the best imprints I've ever read in comic books. And in the future, they use slang, but you couldn't understand one word they were saying in this future flash forward, but that was a purpose. You weren't supposed to. They were supposed to create a snapshot of an alien world that if you were dropped into it, you just would not do well. It doesn't look like your world, even though it's 20, 30 years in the future. Or take a novel like, I think it's called, is it Annihilation? The one they did a movie on too with Natalie Portman. That was, they subverted a lot of tropes there in that, and it was, I thought, gorgeous and alien, and that was its attraction, but that was in the hands of a very accomplished author too, I think. So that's one of my perspectives.
Yeah, actually, one of the words you said there was what popped into my head is like alien. The concept of having a story that doesn't include tropes or cliches feels alien, because I don't know how it would be possible to write one without short of like having your memory completely blanked and like not knowing any stories you've ever heard, because they're so entrenched in every story that we are told, whether it be like books, film, TV, video games. There's tropes and cliches within all of those mediums, and if you grow up absorbing all of those stories, I just don't see how ever be possible to write around them. And I feel like it would be trying to so intentionally subvert them almost, yeah, like I think people have touched on this, has like the opposite effect of making it putting a reader off, because it's just like it would be too far the other way, and I just don't think it would be effective storytelling. I don't think it would draw people in. Like we've said, there's a reason why they exist, and getting rid of them completely seems like totally backwards.
Right, and media influences media in a circle. Like you're saying, So especially now, we have all the video games which have rich storytelling. We have novels from so long ago to now. We have movies. I mean, we even have now podcasts that are story-based. And then we just have the news, which human behavior is how tropes came to be anyway. So the news, and it's constant, and it's, you know, heavy on us, like all single day long, no matter what you tune into for entertainment, or like I said, even maybe not even the news, you're going to find these stories that are about the same thing. And that's what, you know, the tropes, how the tropes are developed. So it's very challenging, and it's not recommended. I think we all agree to try to completely to never use tropes. It's hard work, and it's not fun or exciting. So
we also kind of touched on how tropes and cliches change over time. And there are certain things that would have been commonplace many years ago, but today they are no-nos. So I guess with that in mind, Tiffany, what are some common tropes or cliches that you would recommend always avoiding, at least in this day and age?
I actually didn't have anything specific, but I think as we've all talked, like the feeling overall is that cliches should not be leaned on in your story as, you know, the theme of your story, the theme of your book or your story should be embedded in it. It should be all over. It shouldn't be just in these small pieces, which is really all a cliche can offer. So I think if we're talking about stuff like literal phrases, like the grass is always greener on the other side, if you want to have this theme, which is that sentence like defines a theme, you have to put it in other places as well. So I think you guys will probably have more ideas than I had when I first kind of thought about this question. But for me, it goes back to like, don't be lazy and do your research, make your book more full than just what a cliche can offer. And as you know, tropes offer that, to lean more into that, as opposed to leaning into the cliched phrases and ideas that are still prevalent in our media. Just, you know, think about your story in a more full way.
I think the one that stands out for me is the damsel in distress one, as being quite aged because of just the growing awareness around you know, feminism and the need for fantasy books to have protagonists that aren't just white males. I mean, I think for me, I was growing up at a time where this was starting to take effect, because I read when I was about 10 or 11 Tamora Pierce's Song of the Lioness Quartet, which has obviously got a female protagonist. But I was researching this recently and even found that one of the, I think maybe the third book has an issue around her being a white savior, and that she goes to a clan and becomes like leader of this clan, even though she doesn't know anything about it. So I think, Erin, you touched upon this earlier in terms of, yes, we can see there are more female protagonists in fantasy stories, most definitely, but there's still a way to go for marginalized groups to be presented as much as white males are within. I'm speaking about fantasy in particular, but I'm sure it's, you know, across multiple genres, it is a problem, and it's something that there's still work to be done on.
Yeah, I think two things that I would love to emphasize there. Number one, and one of the examples I used before, actually, it wasn't a cliche, it was a trope. Some tropes deserve to die. Let's be absolutely clear about this. I use the example of the high school kid using tricks and manipulation to get the girl into bed. Look at American Pie, look at Revenge of the Nerds, the movies from my 80s. That's about rape. There's no two ways about it. That's about sexual assault. That's not a trope that should be living. Teachers and students, that trope needs to die. We still see it. I still see it like every week on TV, and it's romanticized. Some tropes deserve to die. I really do believe that. And the second thing I would say, and it's more of a forward-thinking thing, avoid creating your own cliches in your own writing. cliches are something which have been used so often that it's just they lose all flavor and identity and novelty. You create your own cliches, your own shorthand as a writer, certain phrases, certain dialogue tags, certain expressions of suddenness without using the word suddenly. And if you're not careful, you repeat those and they become cliche. I'm on my third novel and I'm starting to see cliches. I'm actually instructing my beta readers in the next one to help me avoid some phrases I always use, because I know my readers tend to reread my books a lot and they'll read them back to back. And when you read like 3 or 4 books out of a series, as well as I do, you can start picking up on some of the author's little tricks and techniques and fallback habits of cliches. So I'm trying to avoid that for my own future writing self as well right now.
That's an interesting point that I actually didn't think of, because I think we all read like an author's whole collection. Sometimes whoever our favorite is, we read their books a lot. And that is a really, really good point, that we have to, as authors, make sure that we're not getting repetitive or using things over and over again that just become it's like, in some ways, I think we've seen those cute little brands of an author that are like, oh, I know that this person wrote this because this is kind of their style, but other things are just not to be used again and again and again. And we do have to look out for those.
Could I want to add one more thing too, like, because that you made me even think of more examples of things that like this how it can become bad in the future. I look at one of the best examples I heard for TV was Friends. When Friends started out, everyone laughed at Joey says stupid things, right? But I remember the writers saying deliberately as the series went on, you can't tell a Joey is stupid joke every episode. If you do, it loses all value. And it also, it puts your own writing into a slump. It reduces your own creativity and novelty. So use it sparingly. When a certain cliche or trope, if it does work well, try to use it so sparingly that you're not, to use a cliche, driving it into the ground.
Like the salt in a dish. You can definitely use too much. Something that came up for me when I was thinking of cliches, and maybe this is a trope that I think needs to die or at least be flipped, is the girl in the refrigerator killing off the female character or the marginalized character in order to provide motivation to the main character is one of the tropes that will absolutely make me put down a book, put down a series, and walk away. So that's an example of tropes that can be, when they're not flipped, can really turn off your readers if you're not thinking deeply about what it implies in the greater logic of the story. And I think this goes off of what Lucy was saying as well, and a couple of you. And I don't know whether we would classify that as a cliche or a trope, but it definitely kind of brings, and it brings back more of that, those ideas that we were talking about earlier, that the stereotypes, when stereotypes and cliches come together, is a huge danger zone for unintentional harm with the way that we tell stories and the assumptions that we make about whose stories are worth telling, and who is the center of a story, and how those other lives and experiences are used around that central character. So yeah, a lot of those need to maybe not die, but be flipped, reclaimed, subverted.
Awesome. So how about tropes and cliches in non-book media, like movies and video games and role-playing games? It'd be a great question for Lynn.
Yes, it is. I am always, whenever I talk about tropes and cliches, I always like to reference the fact that in 1999, 2 films came out. One of them was The Phantom Menace. The other one was Galaxy Quest. And on one hand, we have The Phantom Menace, which is just cliched. It's so tired. It's bad. I'm sorry. No one can defend The Phantom Menace with a straight face. And then on the other hand, we have Galaxy Quest, which is like, what if we put all of the tropes in one box? And they're just like, what? All of them in one box? And it's amazing. So I think that it's just like this really clear, really clear setup where you can see that the ways that people treat these two things, cliches and tropes, and how one can be great and one maybe like doesn't live up to expectations. And I think that's so clear in film, where it's just like, oh, we can sort of like recognize what you're trying to do, but it never quite comes together in like the ways that you want them to. And that's definitely like very like all these little cliches that just don't add up. But tropes always can add up. You just have to do them well. And I think when it comes to tabletop role-playing games and video games, like Christina said, there's a lot of, great storylines and stuff that are being played out in these interactive narrative spaces. And for tabletop role-playing games specifically, tropes and stereotypes are really utilized to help, again, sort of just what we've been saying this whole time, allow readers to inhabit those spaces very easily and give them the tools that they need to make those tropes and cliches their own. It's much less about asking them to embody a cliche or embody a trope, because that's basically sort of what you're given the framework for how to build out, a certain kind of character. But you are also given the power to change all of that. And you're given the power to do whatever you want with it. I have a book right here called Thirsty Sword Lesbians, which is one of my very favorite tabletop role-playing games, but it asks you to embody tropes like the seeker, the scoundrel, the infamous, and you can sort of already tell what these characters are supposed to be like, but it also gives you like a lot of hooks and narrative framework to take those tropes and make them entirely different and sort of give your own spin to it and sort of reimagine what that trope would be like if it was different. I mean, like different. I don't know what to, there's not much more to say about it, but like there's a lot of room in tabletop role-playing games and in video games and in movies specifically in interactive fiction, where people are asked to take on these stereotypes and reinvent them for themselves. And I think that's one of my favorite parts about board games and tabletop role-playing games is that there is a lot of trust put in the players in ways that sometimes books and television don't necessarily show. I think that sometimes it's not there, sometimes it is, but I think for the most part, what I really like and appreciate about tabletop role-playing games is that so much of the power is put in the interpretation and in the person playing through that game, that you really get to reinvent the trope over and over and over and over, even if you, as the writer of a tabletop role-playing game, don't necessarily see that happen.
I think we've seen a lot of like lazy trope utilization lately in film and video game, and examples that stand out to me is like the Assassin's Creed series, for example, which personally, as someone who's played video games like essentially my whole life, when the Assassin's Creed game first came out, it felt really fresh and new and exciting, and like the first few games carried on that trend. But then we started seeing a game out every single year that was just becoming more and more hollow, just becoming like a bit of a cliche of itself in a way. And the Assassin's Creed games now to me are unplayable because it's just this massive empty open world that doesn't really mean anything. The storytelling has gone right out the window in favor of just trying to keep rehashing the same thing. And I think we're seeing that in films as well, in terms of the amount of retellings we're getting at the moment. Like, I don't know about you guys, what you thought of like the Lion King remake or live action remake. It was awful. It was so soulless. It just felt like, why was this made? This was completely unessential. And I think for like stuff like the Men in Black remake, that felt like it was really trying to be something different, and it completely fell over it in its attempt to do that. So I think there's still amazing films that we've seen, and they use tropes really effectively, but I think we have also seen a lot of lazy usage of tropes and cliches.
Yeah, I would really like to bring up the film Everything Everywhere All at Once, which I love. I've written a lot about it. But one of the things that I thought it did really, really well was it took cliches and turned them into really powerful moments. It's Everything Everywhere All at Once is basically about like a family trying to like stay together. And it's about a Chinese immigrant family. There is Evelyn Wang, who is like the tiger mom, dragon lady stereotype, Michelle Yeoh from Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. But it's turned into this moment of power where it's like, what if we took those stereotypes of how these Chinese immigrant women are supposed to act, and we turned it into an act of love and power? What if like the most powerful thing about this character is the fact that she loves people so much that she can't possibly do anything else other than love them? And then there's the other big example is Raymond Wang, who is this very stereotypical Chinese immigrant who is very like, oh gosh, the director described him as a beta male, which I would never do, but Daniel Kwan did it, so blame him. But then at the end of the film, it's shown that he acts like that because he's trying to make sure that he is kind above all else, and where his softness and his tenderness isn't because he's weak, it's because he loves people too, and he loves his family and he wants to protect them. And I think that the best twist of a cliche in that whole film is when Raymond Wang is walking around with his little fanny pack the whole time. And I'm just like, Chinese man in a fanny pack. Like, I get it. I understand what Daniel Kwan is trying to do here. And then it just breaks into like a kung fu sequence where Waymond like whips off the fanny pack and starts using it like a nunchuck, and it just like destroys this whole floor of security guards with this fanny pack. And I'm just like, it's a symbol of power. It's a symbol of power. It's just like sent me through the roof. But yeah, I think that that's just like such an incredible example of like how you can take stereotypes that are very aggressively like not good, you know, like no one would tell you like, oh yeah, like you should totally write a story where you have a Chinese immigrant man in a fanny pack. People would be like, you what? But then of course, like Daniel Kwan, who like has that lived experience, takes it and turns it into this moment of like really incredible power, and where he sort of just stands there and says like, no one is going to shame me off of my story. And we're just gonna have, you know, Ke Huy Quan whipping this fanny pack around for 5 minutes, and y'all are gonna eat it up.
I think that's such a great contrast between these same stories that keep getting retold again and again. And you mentioned The Lion King, which is one of my favorite all-time Disney movies. And I went to that live action and I was looking forward to it, and I was just so disappointed. But of course, that's a retelling too of several ancient stories, including like, I think Macbeth. So when these same stories are getting told over and over again, they really do become cliches, and it loses the creativity and it loses the freshness. But when new people, new ideas, new storytellers are brought into, you know, the broader overculture, that's when we get that freshness, and you know, the tropes become renewed. So I haven't seen that movie yet, but I can't wait to see it. It sounds so great. And that's the real power story right there, is how it can always be new again.
Cool. So just as a wrap-up question, what are your favorite tropes and cliches that you love to either read or watch or play or write? We talked about the bodyguard and the liege lord and the 2 people, 1 bed. Are there any other tropes that if you see, you will just eat it up?
So, I mean, I wrote here evil overlord, but I think there's a way this can be written that can be really effective, and a way that it can be really rubbish. And I think that someone that just makes someone who's like evil for no reason, who just behaves in ways that's like, I'm going to kill this whole village. Actually, what's just flashed into my mind there is the end of Game of Thrones TV show where Daenerys just like snapped for no reason. I don't know if that's a spoiler for anyone, but I'm sorry, I'm still bitter about it. the fact that they didn't give any kind of actual build up to that, it just made it really bad payoff. For me, I like the evil overlord, who is a complex character who has a backstory that's been explored, and their actions are, if not agreeable, then understandable. Because I'm a counsellor in the real world, I like to look at counselling theory and mental health theory, and how people's childhoods, for example, and how they were treated by parents and caregivers and all that kind of stuff impacts on who they become as an adult. That's something that I've looked to explore in my book Awakening, in terms of certain characters like the bad guys. Although, to be honest, for everyone, because I don't think this is just for bad guys, this can be every character. Understanding what has happened to someone in their past can make their present thoughts, feelings, and behaviors way more understandable. So I like to see a bad guy who has been thoroughly fleshed out and isn't just, the dark one and has no kind of redeeming features, if that makes sense.
Is being hot a redeeming feature? Because sorry, I like my bad guys.
The only redeeming feature, I think.
I like my bad guys dumb and hot. Like, great, it's enough.
That's funny that you brought up Game of Thrones, because I did have a little note about that. I think in the WriteHive Word Nerd Cafe, Julie, that you mentioned that episode, it's either that one or Satisfying Ending episode, where they talk specifically about this, and the hysterical woman trope got was brought up. And so I feel like that's like one of those tropes or cliches that should never be written, like just literally going crazy for no reason. I think for any character, it's just very unsatisfying. Like we join characters in order to know them wholly, and we get really attached to them. And so just something that's so literally out of character for them, it's never satisfying. So I think for me, that's what it is. Like, I don't necessarily have a trope. Obviously, anything that's demeaning to any human group, I'm not a fan of. But just a trope that's thrown in or done just sloppily, or done without some clear reasoning, it just agitates me as an author and a reader. For me personally, I love my genre tropes. I write crime fiction mostly, so the hard-boiled detective is a favorite. Like anything related to cops and police procedural, those are really, really all of my favorites. But I just want, my thing overall is just to do them with care, to do them accurately, to subvert whenever possible. So I think overall, it's not necessarily like the trope that I do or do not like, but the execution of the trope.
What I set out to do from the beginning, I set out to do a 9-book series. Before the first book was even on the shelf, I had 9 books plotted out. So this is the work of my lifetime. I've been working on it for over 10 years now. And for me, actually, as someone who's just an obsessive planner, I am not a pantser. I do practice pantsing, writing by the seat of my pants, like Cliche, every now and then. But for the most part, I have, the rest of the series, I've got 300,000 words of notes alone. So I spend years thinking about this stuff. But the reason I was able to, I think, do that and pull it off is because I organized my novel around tropes. So whenever I have a really good idea, there's a home for that idea somewhere. I mean, I have my road trip novel coming up. I've got my massive natural disaster. I've got my, it used to be a Contagion storyline, had to quickly change that one. I planned that 10 years ago, and then we had the pandemic, and there's no way I'm writing a Contagion storyline now. So I turned it into my big monster novel. But by having organizing kind of a theme of my novels around a trope, I'm able to plan some really rich details in the future that, I have an idea that's really good, but I have somewhere to store it for years down the road. So it's one hell of a safety net for me using those tropes. The only other thing I want to say, just like, because I think this is one of our last questions, 2 pieces of advice. If you're using a trope, just ask yourself if it's respectful. That's really the heart of defeating some of these tropes that need to be put in the ground. I am so tired of some of these. ask yourself if that trope is respectful. And the other thing to ask yourself is, when you're writing it, is the trope used so effectively that it reads like a story, or can you see the author's hand at work? If you can see the author reaching their hand in the story and setting the people up where they're supposed to be and what's going to happen, it's never going to read necessarily as that authentic. You know, tropes and in their best possible use, you don't realize you're reading a trope as you're reading it, because your heart's beating fast and you love it and you're engaged with it. You don't see the author trying to kind of pull the strings behind the scenes, you know, the person behind the curtain. But those are my last two thoughts.
Yeah, and when I think about tropes, I mean, I really started writing urban fantasy because I love the tropes of the genre, the supernatural detective, the, you know, badass action girl. You know, those are all tropes that I really gravitated to, especially as a younger reader, you know, as I was kind of developing my personal taste. And I mean, to a certain extent, those tropes are really, that's really where the passion is for the writing, is in those things. Again, I mean, I think I've said that already several times, but it's, you know, the joy that comes in kind of making those tropes your own is really special. So, you know, a couple of tropes I love that I included, you've got, like you said, the kind of noirish crime fiction type detective procedural, something I love mystery, so I'd love to bring in that kind of those specific tropes and blend genres in that way. The action heroine, always a favorite, just a complete sucker for those kind of characters. And then other like relationship tropes, like the hot mess and the nurturing, dominant, things like that, playing with power dynamics in ways that are empowering to the characters involved. Those are all some tropes that I am interested in and that I explore in my writing.
Grumpy Sunshine. I love it. Nothing wrong with Grumpy Sunshine. I also like really, really dumb himbo lesbians. I don't know what to tell you. If a girl is buff and real stupid, I love her. No questions asked. I love the trope where like someone gets a gun or another weapon and they're like, I don't even know how to use this thing. And then they shoot someone immediately and like kill them. And I'm just like, it's so dumb. And I love it. It's just perfect. It's just the best. Another trope that I'm actually playing with in one of the books that I'm editing right now is where someone has a bodyguard, but really they're just like so powerful that they don't need a bodyguard. And they end up saving the bodyguard like multiple times. And I'm just like, it's good. It's very good. So I really like very, very silly tropes and cliches that aren't necessarily, you know, that important. But yeah, man, I love a big lesbian. I love her.
All right. Well, unless anybody has any final thoughts, we'll go ahead and wrap up the panel. So thanks everybody for coming and talking with us today. And if you'd like to, say any final thoughts or tell us where to find you or plug any upcoming projects, now is your chance to do that.
The second book in my urban fantasy series, Cambion's Blood, came out just a couple days ago on June 7th. So that is a urban fantasy series about a half succubus lawyer. Talk about your tropes. So definitely check that out if that's something that's interesting to you. I also I blog about writing craft, author career, and lots of other topics, whatever kind of comes up, but mostly to do with writing at erinfulmer.com. And I'm also, you can always find me on Twitter at Erin Fulmer. So thank you so much. Enjoyed this panel a lot.
Katie?
My series is called The Tarot Sequence. The third book came out in May, and I do have 9 books planned in the series. I'm certainly under contract for a few more after this. And you can reach me best. Social media that I use the most is Twitter at KD_Edwards_NC for North Carolina. And my website is kd-edwards.com. And thank you for including me on this panel. I've really had a good time with these discussions and these authors.
Awesome. Lynn?
Well, as I furiously look at my author website, my website is lindahcodega.com. But the easiest way to find me is on Twitter, Lynn Codega, just at Lynn Codega, because I am, again, a pop culture journalist. So a lot of writing from me goes up every week. Some of it, not my proudest moments. And then some of it is like me just, waxing about how Free Guy is a Marxist text. So, you do what you can. So definitely follow me on Twitter at Lynn Codega for more hot takes.
Excellent. Tiffany?
So one last thing that I want to say on this topic is if you are interested in finding out more about tropes or seeing which tropes are tropes or getting more information about tropes, tvtropes.org is an amazing website that has every single trope. And I always tell authors about this. They're like, oh, but it's for TV. And I say, I promise your trope is in there. Because again, there's so much media. They also have some books featured on their site, and just literally every single trope is there, I promise. So that is a little reference that I always give people when I talk about tropes. But for me, my books are on Amazon. I write crime fiction. I have a women's lit short story collection, and I'm constantly writing and independently publishing my stories. So Tiffany Christina Lewis on Amazon is where you can find my books. Again, I'm also a podcaster. My podcast is called Beta Reader Bits, and it is a kind of short length podcast about how to use beta readers, where to find beta readers, and just literally every single thing about beta reading, as well as some tips that I often give authors when I beta read for them. I am on Twitter mostly at author TC Lewis, and I'm on Instagram under the same handle, but not as much.
Okay, and Lucy.
Okay, so my author website is a mouthful. It's lucyamclaren.wordpress.com. Twitter is my main social media as well, which is just at Lucy A. McLaren. My first book, Awakening, released on the 1st of May. And this has, it's got the found family trope. It's got the chosen one trope, kind of. It's got the redeeming featured evil overlord. So if you fancy any of that and you want to give this a go, it's the first in the trilogy, and I would love to hear what people think if they do read it. But yeah, I also have loved this chat, so thank you very much for having me. It's been really fun.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you, everybody. I've also very much enjoyed this, and we will just say enjoy the rest of the conference.